My name's Megan Hyun. I work at the University of Nebraska Medical Center as a medical physicist. My husband, Alex, is a philosopher, and the two of us have actually started doing some collaborative work together lately. We like to have conversations about, ethics, philosophy, science, and everything in between. We also just had a son last year, so I just became a mom. I grew up in Michigan. My parents are Christians, and I grew up in a Christian home, so my interest in faith and science really started at a very young age and has kind of carried with me through my entire career and schooling and everything. Yeah, I think the first time that I started struggling with concepts between my science classes and my faith was probably high school. I had friends around me who maybe didn't embrace the creation narrative, and I wanted to accept everything I was learning in class, but also accept everything I was learning at church. And I wouldn't say that I fell on one side or the other of like a creation evolution debate, but I was just holding this tension and feeling kind of uncomfortable with it. And then when I went to college, I went to a Christian university, and they really emphasized this integration between faith and learning. And so that was when I started to kind of fuse some of those things I learned in science class, some of the things that I believed in my core, and put them together. I've had conversations with people on both sides of this issue that have been very frustrating. Some people really saying that you should look at Genesis and say, this is literally what happened. These are literal days. It's 24-hour periods. But we also know from Scripture that to God, a day could be 1,000,000 years, and 1,000,000 years could be like a day. And on the other side, I've had people who treat science almost like a religion, and who can also be very, emphatic and frustrating in the way that they engage on this topic too. One of the hardest times for me wrestling with these issues was when I was in undergrad. I did an internship in Indiana, and that summer I was staying in a dorm with lots of other students also learning physics, and I walked into the common room one day, and everyone was having a pretty heated conversation. I said, "Hey, what are you guys talking about?" And they said, "Oh, we're talking about, science and faith." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I love talking about this, sign me up." And I sat down so confident that I would have all the right words to say and that it would just be this wonderful conversation. And it immediately became clear that both people on either side of the issue were very, very upset. Before I even walked into the conversation. One person was bringing up very personal stuff about, how Christians had really wounded them in the past, and they were so rooted in these fundamentalist ideas that were hurtful to people and that just completely ignored our scientific knowledge. And on the other side, someone who really didn't seem to have the tools to talk to people about this issue without just going back to things that he believed were true that they completely rejected. When you're talking to someone who doesn't believe that the Bible is true, you really have to adjust, the way you talk about things, because they're coming at it from a totally different perspective. And so that conversation was really hard because both people were so emotionally invested in it. Both people were not using the right language to win over the other person. And so I learned a lot kind of the hard way about, how difficult this topic can be, how invested people can be in it, and how hurtful people can be when they're not really making the points that they want to. And I left that conversation in tears, and I ended up talking to one of my physics professors about it afterward, and he was very affirming and, just kind of encouraged me not to give up having those conversations, but it can be really hard. I have hope that, as a church, that we can get better at having conversations about science and faith. I think I've seen churches that I've been a member of do a good job of this, where they bring in experts on the Scripture, they bring in experts on the science, and they have open conversations. So seeing churches take a role in having those conversations is just a really great start, and that gives me a lot of hope. I also, becoming a parent has been really formative for me, thinking about how are my husband and I going to explain to our son, the beautiful relationship that we see between our disciplines and our faith that he might not see from the beginning. And so thinking about how to teach him our love of Jesus and our love of science and our love of philosophy all at the same time helps me to also have hope for talking to other adults about these topics too.